Hello, I'm Michael Eisner, and welcome to the Disney Sunday Movie.
There's an old story about Disney in the 1980s. Newly appointed CEO Michael Eisner brought Jeffrey Katzenberg on board as chairman of Motion Pictures, with one of his main responsibilities being to revitalize the dwindling animation department. Katzenberg called for a screening of the studio's latest film, The Black Cauldron, and wound up disturbed at the film's dark tone and deemed it unsuitable for release. When the screening ended, he proclaimed, "This has to be edited." But the film's producers just stared at him. "There's nothing to edit," they said. "There's no excess footage. You can't just take scenes out and put new ones in. You can't edit an animated film." But Katzenberg just replied, "That's ridiculous. You can edit anything." And of course, he's right. Animated films aren't something we usually think of needing to be edited. Scenes are written, shots are animated, and then clips are just put together in the order they're meant to be in, right? But the process of editing an animated film involves far more than what we normally think of an editor doing. On the contrary, the job is actually one of the longest lasting and most intensive roles in the entire production.
The simple way of putting it is, on live action, they shoot first and then you edit later, and in animation you sort of edit first and then you shoot it later.
Imagine every single one of the movies you're going to cut, you get called 2 years before they start shooting, and your director says, "Hey, here's the deal. I want you to sit with me and the writer, and let's figure the movie out together.
Wow.
Let's go ahead and write it. Sometimes you'll get a chance to write part of it. The writer will write part of it. Sometimes the director will work it. And we spend 2 years figuring out the story. And then once we've gotten the story figured out, then we spend the last year of usually a 3-year process actually shooting the movie, which is animating the movie."
Because unlike in live action, editorial isn't a separate department from the main production. It's one of the key roles in shaping the film being made.
What
the
does an
editor's,
editor
the
do in
editor's
animation?
very, very involved, like much more than an editor is actually involved in live action, because they're brought on much earlier and they're actually a part of the writing process of the film. They're just kind of like a key component in the early development of the film in a way that you're not in live action.
And that has everything to do with the way animated films are developed. Screenplays aren't just written and then animated straight from that. The process is one that's far more collaborative. So you'll have your basic story, your goal for what you want the film to be, but what happens is that really anyone working on the film can throw out ideas, usually just a single moment, a gag, or a conversation, or anything really. And then the animators will turn those ideas into storyboards. And when you get enough storyboards, you can put together a rough draft of what the film could look like. And that's the nitty-gritty of the editor's job, piecing all of those individual ideas into animatics, complete with temp music and scratch vocals and basic sound effects.
And when it all comes together, it gives you a basic sense of what the film will be like, and we call this a story reel. Now, our first attempt usually doesn't quite work.
It's almost like you show your director your editor's cut, the first cut, except now you can say, all right, do you want to go back and reshoot the movie again? Because we got the story guys and they're going to go through and redraw, and so that's what ends up happening. You iterate. And you want to try and get 3 or 4 passes at a scene before you really feel like you've gotten it right.
So we start thinking and talking and drawing and rewriting and recutting, and we try it again. And usually the second try is a little closer, but still not quite it. So each sequence takes about 3 to 5 working sessions. Each session is about 3 to 4 hours, and that's not counting all the work, of course, that builds up to that. For any given film, we have approximately 27 sequences, so if you do the math, that comes to a lot. I don't know, I went to art school.
Live action editing is a very reactive game. You know, you have what you have. You have what was filmed on the set, and you have to make it work, which is great, and it's nice to have that challenge. But in animation, you have a lot more control. You know, if as an editor, if I don't have a shot that I need or that I'd like to have, I can pitch the director on it, and it doesn't involve having to go back to Tibet on location to get the shot that's missing. We can just create it. So it's very liberating, and thus the editor gets their hands much messier in the creative process.
And that's the main difference. In live action, the editor is just as much of an influential voice in shaping the film, but the majority of their job often occurs after principal photography is already done. And in worst case scenarios, that can mean that they're not so much creating, but salvaging. But as we've established, animation is the opposite. The editor is that additional voice, pushing and pulling, helping to guide the film into the best possible place.
Well, the whole movie gets complete from whatever we were recording to the point that we were actually finished. The whole movie was completely rewritten. I don't think there was a scene that didn't go through a full rewrite of some sort or another. There were probably 15 different bunce raids that were written, and 2 or 3 of them that were actually animated before we actually just arrived at that one, which was the simplest one. The raid of Boggs' farm with the electric fence, that was never in there until we decided how we were going to kill Rat. And when we decided that we were going to kill Rat with electricity, then we knew we wanted to introduce it somewhere else, and then that gag fell in there. And the pieces of the puzzle are like that the whole time. You never have any real sense of flow.
But there's a downside that comes as a result of that process. Going back to the Black Cauldron, the producers were actually kind of right when they said that there was nothing to edit. When you're editing live action and say the film's release is like a month or 2 away, it's not a big deal to go back and make additional cuts. It happens all the time. But that's not the same case in animation. When scenes are locked, they go through layout and then into final animation. And once there, it becomes a much bigger deal to then have to go back and make a change, say switching a wide to a close-up, or even just extending a shot by a few seconds. That's why it's something of a backwards process when compared to live action. There, you can just throw caution to the wind and just start experimenting and playing around towards the end of your edit. But in animation, you have to do all of that at the very beginning. But as different as it may be, the core of the job is still the same. It requires just as much, if not more, creativity and experimentation. And of course, emotion. Because regardless of whether or not it's live or drawn, that's what editing is all about.
Now, after hearing this, you might well ask yourself, why? Why do you do all that? Why don't you just get it right the first time? Well, the problem is we know we're going to be wrong. And if we don't allow ourselves to be wrong, we're never going to do anything new. We're just going to rely on things that we know work. So for us, making mistakes is an essential part of our process. We're not embarrassed by it. In fact, we plan for it.